Killzone is a grim, gritty sci-fi FPS series set in a bleak world, where the Interplanetary Strategic Alliance, or ISA, wars against the Helghan Empire. The series is a PlayStation exclusive, and before the first game's launch, it was even heralded as a Halo killer. Of course, with the power of hindsight, we can see that this future never came to be. Killzone spawned a number of sequels, but it has been dormant since 2013. Growing up with the PlayStation platforms, Killzone is a series I grew to love. In fact, I would list it as one of my favorite first-person shooter franchises of all time. With all these years past, with all of the hype having come and gone, I want to take a look back at this series, starting with the first entry, Killzone. I want to look at the game as it stands alone and see how it tells its story and how it builds its world. The world of Killzone is fascinating to me. The iconography alone as well, iconic. The Helghast masks are a staple of video games at this point, and a lot of people could recognize the mask without even knowing what franchise the soldiers belong to. The series takes great inspiration from World War II, and because of this grounded starting point, the series has a much more grounded feel than many of its contemporaries. The grim and gritty aesthetic back in the late 2000s may have been overdone, but in today's gaming landscape, the world Killzone presents is refreshingly different. No shooter does grim and gritty better than Killzone in my opinion. The focus of this video will be on the world building, characters, story, and overall storytelling of Killzone. Of course, games are an interactive medium, and gameplay is the largest part of how a player engages with the world, so it has a big role in how the player perceives the story and the world. So I'll be discussing gameplay, but largely in terms of how it impacts storytelling and immersion. There will be spoilers. Hopefully that was obvious with the story breakdown, but here's the disclaimer anyway. Let's strap on our M82s and start at the most natural place, the beginning. The game opens with a rousing speech given by the Helghan Emperor, Scholar Viscari. He is speaking to his army, preparing them for invasion against their enemies. During this speech, he recalls the history of the Helghans. The Helghans fled the planet of Vecta, which is under control of the ISA, and forged a new home on the rough, unforgiving planet of Helghan. They view themselves as victims of oppression by the ISA. Starting the game from the antagonist's point of view is an interesting choice, but I think it really works here. We get the Helghans' motivation right away. When we fight against their soldiers throughout the game, we know what they believe and what they stand for. In fact, it's a pretty sympathetic argument. If the Helghan view themselves as oppressed, it makes sense that they will do nearly anything to fight their enemies. However, we see blemishes in the picture that Scholar Viscari paints. We see Helghast soldiers execute their own people in cold blood, political dissidents that need to be re-educated or removed. For all that Scholar Viscari speaks about oppression, he seems to be giving the same treatment to his own people. The Helghast commence their invasion on Vecta, and we see glimpses of it while the Emperor concludes his speech. During these segments, it's predominantly civilians who we see the Helghast kill. Their morally righteous ground gives way under their rampant violence. When the Emperor concludes his speech, he withdraws into the shadows with a sinister smile as his people cheer. It's the smile of a man who succeeded in telling a story that his people have bought, hook, line, and sinker. Through this introduction, Killzone manages to paint the conflict as morally gray, making the player understand why their enemies are fighting, while still depicting the Helghast as ultimately in the wrong for their invasion. It's truly well done. The first level opens with us taking the shoes of Captain Templar. He's holed away in a ditch, bracing against a Helghast defensive. Killzone is a science fiction game, so the stars are the limit when it comes to depicting the setting. So I think the fact that Killzone chooses to open with us in the dirt and grime of a ditch is a powerful statement about the tone that the game is aiming for. The imagery is very evocative of trench warfare from the First World War, a style of battle infamous for its brutality and high death counts. Commander Templar gives orders to his comrade, and then gameplay begins. When in gameplay, the player's character is silent, so there isn't much more characterization for Templar at this point. However, this isn't really needed quite yet. Once the player is acclimated to the controls, the game wastes no time in pitting us against the Helghast. They crest over the hills through the dusty haze, and they seem endless. This is a good way of communicating the scale of the Helghast invasion, and that this enemy will continue advancing. The first chapter of the game is all about building the war-torn atmosphere, which is done through a variety of means. The color scheme is desaturated and bleak, with browns and grays dominating. As Commander Templar moves through the environment, he transitions from war-torn bunkers to streets and buildings that have been devastated by war. The sound design as well plays a large part in building the atmosphere, but I'll touch more on this in a moment. During this first level, Templar jumps between military objectives, taking out snipers, destroying tanks, and so on. Advancing the story isn't the main goal, but then it doesn't need to be. As I mentioned, this level is all about immersing the player in the conflict, and these gameplay objectives accomplish that. After achieving his goals, Templar is summoned by General Vaughton. He gives us a brief overview of how the war effort is going. In short, not good.
We're being attacked by the 3rd Helghan Army, led by a General Lente. If Helghast ships keep on flooding in with more troops, we may as well pack up right here, right now.
So much for taking them out of the sky before they land.
Yeah.
Through their conversation, we get a bit more characterization of Templar. Despite his disappointment in how the war is going, he's dedicated to doing his duty. Furthermore, it's clear that he has a personal connection with Vaughton, judging by how the general puts a hand on his shoulder. The general gives a mission to Templar. They have a spy behind enemy lines named Colonel Haka, and he's reportedly discovered intel that is vital to the war effort. He was last holed up in a mall with an ISA platoon, but they've lost contact. Templar needs to find the spy and retrieve him. He needs to move quickly because the Helghast are after him too. With this, we have our inciting incident for the story. Things quickly ramp up when an explosion rocks the facility. The Helghast are pushing in, and the general orders an evacuation. The general is also waiting on a security key to be delivered, but with the facility in disarray, who knows where it is now. This key is critical for the general to override a control failsafe on the solar defense network and get it operational again. This network is crucial for Vetka's defense. Given the importance of this mission, Templar volunteers to find the security key. He battles through Helghast troops who have flooded into the facility. This mission primarily constitutes close quarters combat with the enemy. Because of this, it serves as a great opportunity to dive more deeply into the Helghast enemy design. The Helghast are one of my favorite factions to fight in games, up there with the Covenant and Locust factions in Halo and Gears of War. The Helghast are a very immersive opponent. They come across as very lifelike and imposing. I think the biggest contributor to this fact is the audio design. The Helghast are a very chatty enemy. Troops constantly make callouts that are contextually accurate to the situation. They'll yell things like incoming fire and frag grenade if you shoot at them or toss a grenade.
Incoming frag! Come on! We're surrounded!
They also talk to each other, yelling things like cover me. All of these callouts really make the Helghast feel like an intelligent enemy to fight against. Furthermore, they share a gravelly modulated voice which is distinctive and provides further character. I did mean to say that they feel intelligent. In reality, the AI does have its dumb moments, sometimes just standing there while you blast into them. They make up for any deficit though with a high level of accuracy. In fact, oftentimes they feel more accurate than the player. The weapons in Killzone generally have a level of bloom or built-in inaccuracy to them. You'll miss some shots even if you're right on target. Meanwhile, the Helghast are pretty dead accurate. This also contributes to the feeling that the Helghast are competent opponents. They strategize, but they also shoot well. They feel like you're equals, perhaps even your superiors. This gameplay design does have some drawbacks, but it's not prominent during this close quarter segment, so I'll touch on it later. Lastly, the surrounding audio design also adds a lot to the combat encounters. There is a great attention to detail given to shooting different environmental objects. Glass walkways shatter when battling against a Helghast, and this mixes with the gunfire and enemy chatter to create a chaos that is immersive. Water jugs even have realistic sound effects when shot. Each of these touches are small on their own, but when combined with the surrounding gunfire and explosions, they really flesh out the soundscape.
Damn it! I'm doing my best here! I got your back!
All this to say, the Helghast are an intense but also imposing threat during gameplay. I think this is an important part of building the story, as the Helghast being intimidating in combat reinforces the threat they present in the narrative. It immerses the player and also helps them buy into the story. Templar manages to recover the key, but when he tries to meet with the general, he runs into another familiar face. Luger, a Shadow Marshal, saves his life. She and Templar know each other. In fact, you can sense a deeper connection. Templar is clearly uncomfortable during their conversation.
Vorton told me to meet you here too. He said you'd brief me on our mission.
Our mission? Trust the general to put practicalities ahead of, well, anything else.
This is a pretty strong introduction to Luger. Through her stabbing of the sniper, the player discerns that she's cold and can be ruthless. The subtext between her and Templar also builds intrigue. Although Templar isn't happy, he learns that the general sent Luger to him to accompany him on his mission to rescue the spy. But first, he and Luger need to deliver the security key to the general. Meanwhile, General Adams impatiently waits for General Vaughton to arrive with the key. Seeing how General Vaughton appears to be lost, General Adams demands his technician to find another way to access the solar defense network. He comes across as very menacing with a hair-trigger temper.
Well, whatever it is you pray to, I'd start praying now that Vaughton reappears.
After this, the next level commences. With Luger now a member of the squad, the player now actually gets to select which character they play as in all future missions. This, I think, is one of the most fascinating game design choices Killzone makes, as it has significant benefits as well as drawbacks. I'll delve into these further as the game progresses. Luger as a Shadow Marshal has a different starting weapons kit than Templar. Instead of an assault rifle, she starts with a submachine gun and a knife. In addition, she can utilize her thermal goggles via the circle button. Luger also gets unique attack animations with her combat knife, including throwing it at her enemies. These aren't major changes, but in combination they succeed at giving Luger a distinct identity during gameplay. Although I will say her submachine gun feels a tad overpowered. The thing shreds Helghast up close and even at a distance. It even has a sniper secondary fire. She and Templar make their way across a park, fighting through Helghast infantry. This is one of my favorite segments of the game. The beauty of the pink trees stands in stark contrast to the bleak, overcast skies and the war-torn buildings at the park's fringes. Leaves wistfully drift across the landscape. When Luger uses her thermal goggles, the sight is similarly beautiful, if a bit alien. The two learn that General Vaughton has been taken prisoner by the Helghast, and they move in to save him. Meanwhile, Templar inquires if Luger made any friends during her absence. She immediately calls him out.
I mean, did you make any new friends?
Are you asking me if I got laid?
What?
Her cool, distant attitude stands in contrast against his flustered state, and this dynamic makes both of their personalities stand out more. Along the way, they meet with a machine gun-toting soldier named Rico, who joins them to free the general. Once they do so, Templar hands the security key to the general, and we learn more about our new friend Rico. Let's just say that he really does not like the Helghast.
Sergeant, it seems these two owe you,
It's the enemy who owe me, not these two. The Helghast scum wiped out my entire platoon, and they'll be paying off that debt in blood for as long as I breathe. Sir.
So right away, we get a bit of Rico's backstory and motivation, which is good. He's a bit one note, but he'll bounce off another upcoming character pretty well. The general assigns Rico to Templar's unit, seeing his potential to aid in the mission. Meanwhile, the general will head up to the SD platform. Our three musketeers head out to retrieve this missing spy, and they need to travel through the slums. Rico is now a playable character too. How does he play compared to our commander and the Shadow Marshal? Well...
Damn slums anyway.
Out of the 4 playable characters, Rico is the most unique, and that comes down to his machine gun. Rico is the only character that gets to use this behemoth, which has a ridiculously high rate of fire, as well as a rocket launcher strapped to it. He's a lot of fun, but on top of that, I think his kit perfectly reflects his personality. Rico is a character filled with rage and animus towards the Helghast. You can feel this rage when playing as him. This is mainly through unleashing his machine gun, with its dull and rapid thuds that are nearly deafening. There's just a tactile sense of mercilessness and ferocity to it, especially when you launch a rocket for good measure. It's a bit hard to describe in words because it really is a feel thing, but all in all, his gameplay design does a good job of reflecting his personality and making you feel the same emotions that he does. The trio comes across wounded ISA soldiers. One of them has information on the spy. Templar attempts to administer aid, but Luger stops his hand. She wants the information out of the soldier first. This scene uses body language and actions to contrast the differences in their behavior. Luger is cold and mission focused, while Templar has more concern over his fellow soldiers. They get their information, but the soldier dies. Still, the trio continues on. This level takes us through a mall, as well as the slums, and the environmental design gives us a good idea of civilian life. There's a cold utilitarianism to everything. The mall feels very cold, with support beams everywhere. It's built for purpose, not beauty. You get this sense that life on Vetka prioritizes use and function over aesthetics. The trio reach their spy, and while they're all caught a bit off guard. This spy isn't human, well, not fully human. He's half Helghan, half human. This sends Rico into a frenzy, as you might imagine, and only Templar's repeated orders stop him from killing the spy. For his part, the spy isn't flustered. From this we can gather a few things. First, Colonel Haka is a steady man under pressure, which makes sense given his occupation. Second, there's a lack of surprise on his face. It seems he was expecting a cold reception. It's likely that he is used to treatment like this. Templar and his comrades don't know whether to trust Haka.
Haka.
Yes.
Whose side are you on, Haka?
My side.
Shit. We'll see what side he's on when I've got this baby shoved up his papa's.
Then in a flash, he grabs an assault rifle and shoots. His target isn't Templar's squad, however. He instead kills an approaching Helghan before handing the weapon back to Templar. Rico isn't impressed. Between this, we get a quick interlude with General Adams. He learns that General Vaughn is on his way to the SD platform with the security key. The squad decides to continue on with Haka, even though they are suspicious of him. Templar also makes a snippy comment to Luger, another indication of their prior relationship. She tells him to get over it.
He seems to be hot for you.
Get over it, Jan.
Now that they have retrieved Haka, they need to get him off the planet. That means heading to an ISA fortress and having Haka board the next shuttle. Rico is not too happy about their newest member, and he immediately dogs on him. Haka, for his part, responds with a witty rejoinder.
We'd better head for the docks.
Great. Seasickness. It's bad enough having to look at this mutant's face all day.
Well, those of us with even remotely developed minds rise above the frailties of the flesh and cope with it.
Once more, his personality shines through. He's sharp as attack and also has a wry snark. Now that the squad is filled out, we see a handful of dynamics taking place. There is tension between Luger and Templar, and there is also tension between Haka and Rico. They head along the shoreline as an impending storm looms. Haka is our fourth and final playable character. His kit, I have to say, is a bit disappointing. He is the most intriguing member of the fire team, being half Helghan and all, but this doesn't really get expressed via gameplay. He's equipped with the same Helghast assault rifle that we see all our enemies using and can pick up ourselves. He also has a combat knife, but it lacks the cool combat animations that Luger has, or at least I couldn't get any to trigger. His one unique trait is that he can pass through trip mines that would kill the other squad mates. That's because the trip mines are calibrated to let Helghast through, and since Haka is part Helghan, they don't affect him. This enables Haka to visit parts of the levels that are unavailable to his squad mates. It's pretty circumstantial though, and doesn't have the same moment-to-moment impact of Rico's machine gun, for instance. This shoreside level is murky, dark, and bleak, and therefore fits in well with the rest of the game. Despite the variety of biomes the squad visits, they all feel cohesive due to this ever-bleak mood. This consistency, I think, is what makes the world feel believable. They connect with some ISA soldiers, and they help defend against incoming hordes of Helghast as they make a beach landing. Much like the bunker battles at the beginning of the game, This scene is very evocative of European wars during the 20th century. I'm sure you can see the parallels between this scene and the Normandy beach landing. It's gritty, with sand kicking up as explosions rock the beach. Killzone's pairing of science fiction with historical references works really well, and it's one of the reasons the setting lands for me. It's a universe whose realism inspires further curiosity. The team battles its way through shipping docks. Haka requests access to the mainframe. Rico, of course, isn't too keen on the idea. This guy really lays his dislike for Haka on thick. Luger has a more sympathetic ear. Rico dogs on him more until Haka finally has had enough. Rico puts a gun to him, and Luger puts her knife to Rico. Templar breaks up the fight and demands that all of them get their act together. Here we see his leadership skills demonstrated. Although the situation isn't ideal, he still has a cool head. He gives Haka some time to look into the mainframe. Unfortunately, things take a turn for the worse. General Vaughton reaches the SD system and activates the system with a security key, alongside General Adams. But Haka learns the devastating truth. There's a Helghast mole in the ISA, and it's none other than General Adams. They're helpless to stop the turncoat. Helghast storm into the control room, led by the Helghast General Lente himself. General Adams reveals his betrayal before unceremoniously killing General Vaughton.
You lose. Traitor. Yeah, whatever. Kill him.
You have done well, General. I will ensure that Scholar Visari hears of your efforts.
I'll tell him myself, thank you, General Lente.
There's a coldness in this murdering that's unsettling. General Adams seems to hold no hint of remorse for turning on his own people. The SD system is now in the hands of the Helghast. General Adams wastes no time putting it to use. This is my first video of the year, so it's a good time to announce my New Year's resolution. I'm a science fiction author, and at the end of 2023, my latest novel won the New England Book Festival in the category of general fiction. This gave me a lot of hope and excitement for the future. This is the year where I start making strides to have the book reach Amazon's bestseller list, and I'd love for you to be a part of that story. The best way to build a book status on Amazon is through user reviews. They help increase a book's visibility and make ads more effective. It's a snowball effect. So, I'm making a big push towards getting more reviews on my novels. If you could buy the first novel in the series, Apocalypse Bounty, and leave a review, it would mean the world. The review only needs to be a sentence or two, so it only takes a couple of minutes out of your day. Links are in the description to my website and Amazon page. My first milestone is 30 reviews on Apocalypse Bounty. I'm already at 12 reviews, so just 18 of you could make this goal happen. Whenever we hit that mark, I plan on releasing a celebration video on a game that my viewers, you all, choose. I'm still working out how I'll solicit requests, so expect more info in the future. Whether or not you have the funds or the time to support my work, just know that I appreciate each and every one of you for checking out my videos. I'm extremely grateful. This squad fights through more Helghast forces and reaches a boat. The question is, where do they go now? General Adams used the SD system to blow up the fortress, and with it, Haka's intended escape route. Commander Templar comes up with another plan. They are going to head to the uplink instead, which feeds the SD system. Somehow they need to stop Adams. A relief fleet from Earth is inbound to Vetka. Commander Templar figures that Adams intends to use the SD system to blow the fleet into smithereens. Commander Templar's idea of reaching the uplink is dangerous, as it requires passing through hordes of Helghast, but no other options appear to be available. They head for the ruins of the fortress, where they can get a lay of the land and reach the uplink. Unfortunately, they don't get very far before Helghans give chase. The squad crashes into a swamp, and we get some more tension between Templar and Luger. Their history is a plot point that continues to be pressed on. I keep mentioning it because it will be important to my commentary later. The Helghast swarm, and the squad has to fight through the swamp on their way to the ruined fortress. Along the way, they discover an enemy firebase. The squad deliberates whether to punch through it or just go around. Surprisingly, both Haka and Rico agree to attack it, although for very different reasons. Rico just has a pretty gut-level desire to kill the enemy, while Haka has a bit more of a nuanced stratagem.
Captain Templar, you said earlier that our chances of making it through enemy ranks were somewhere between slim and nil. Perhaps we could improve those odds by creating something of a stir right here. A confused enemy is more easily played. as every assassin knows.
So, the mighty brain agrees with the grunt. That's a first.
Even a monkey will write Shakespeare, given enough time.
Despite this agreement, both men actually see it as yet another opportunity to denigrate each other rather than come together. Yet at the same time, I think this agreement subliminally starts a bond of trust between them. If they are coming to the same conclusions about what to do, well then they are likely on the same side. I like this scene because it feels realistic and not forced, while at the same time starting to develop their trust. The squad manages to destroy the base, and they continue to the ruined fortress, where the surviving ISA soldiers are holding out against incoming Helghast. The squad reaches a comms room, and Templar orders Haka to get a message out about General Adams. They're stopped by an ISA soldier who believes they're actually the traitors. General Adams warned them about this rogue squad, and how General Vaughn betrayed everyone. We see here just how deeply General Adams' treachery goes, and the confusion he's instilled in the ranks. The squad learns of General Vaughn's death. Templar takes it pretty hard, while Luger tells him to pull it together. She's pretty cold about it, even though the general was her friend too. But as always, she's mission focused. Meanwhile, General Adams talks with General Lentes about the plan. General Lentes treats him with contempt, and it makes you wonder what exactly General Adams is in this for. What does he get by siding with the faction that despises him? I think it's the most compelling part of General Adams' character. These generals learn about Templar's squad, and its rescue of Haka, and the destruction of the firebase. General Adams correctly guesses Templar's plan to get to the uplink to reach the general. The general spreads the message that he's heading down to the GPS beacon, where he knows the squad will have to pass. On the surface, Haka learns about General Adams' descent via enemy radio chatter. The squad then deliberates on what to do. They can either continue to the uplink or go after Adams instead. Templar decides to go after Adams, since this may be the only opportunity they get. Eventually the squad reaches the GPS beacon, which is a fortified base, replete with bunkers, turrets, and hordes of men. Templar's squad manages to fight their way through. They come to the devastating realization though that General Adams isn't here. He never planned on being here. Rico immediately blames Haka. This makes perfect sense given Rico's suspicion of the Helghan, plus the fact that Haka was the one that discovered the false intel about Adams. Templar once again has to break them up. Haka correctly surmises that this was all a setup, and that he was meant to hear the audio message. Rico still wants to ditch Haka, but Luger and Templar urge him to work with the Helghan instead.
If he's captured, they'll tear him to pieces, slowly and painfully. I think he'll be fighting in our corner.
Templar has a pretty good point. It's a pretty dire consequence for Haka if he gets captured, and it makes you wonder, why is he risking everything to help humanity? Why did he betray his Helghan comrades? We still don't have an answer. The most intriguing parts of the plot, at least for me, are the characters' motivations, mainly Colonel Haka and General Adams. So the squad isn't very happy from this turn of events, but neither are their enemies. General Adams planned on the GPS beacon being a death trap, but Templar's squad is still standing. Adams is pretty angry, and it's worsened by General Lentes looming over his shoulder. You can very directly sense the pressure imposed on Adams to succeed here. Lentes decides to take matters into his own hands. Templar's squad has a Helghan in it, and it takes a Helghan to take down a Helghan, at least in the general's mind. He decides to head down to the planet and intercept the rebel squad. General Adams once again endures a heavy heaping of disdain, and again it really makes you wonder why he's putting up with this treatment. Why did he make this bed to lie in? Templar's squad continues on despite the setback. They come across enemy forces and signal to each other. I think their concise, nonverbal communication displays how they're working more organically together as a squad, despite their bickering. And it's a good use of visual storytelling. The next segment is pretty combat heavy, as the squad fights through hordes of enemy forces, with the aid of a laser designator that rains down explosives on the enemy. This is a good time to delve more into how I think the ability to select a playable character impacts the game and story. First, I'll start with the benefits. As I've discussed, each character's kit does a pretty good job of communicating their personality via gameplay. In addition, certain pathways and levels are only available to certain characters. Haka can pass through the Helghan lasers, while Luger can crawl under small passages. These lead to slightly alternate routes. Sometimes you'll be in the same area but have different objectives. For instance, in one segment, Luger and Templar need to clear out a tower, while Rico and Haka have to clear a landing pad instead. Based on which character you choose to play as, you'll tackle one of the objectives. On top of that, level layouts can change. For instance, in the Harbor Docks level, if you play as Luger, there's a crane you can climb up and snipe enemies. The most drastic case is the final level, where each character has entirely different objectives and even different sub-levels. This all gives Killzone a lot of replayability, significantly more than most linear shooters. None of the changes I mentioned are too major, but it's enough to make replaying missions feel novel. I didn't replay every mission as every character, but I replayed a few to get a feel for the changes. These upsides are related to gameplay. Unfortunately, I think there are negative impacts to the story, particularly when it comes to fleshing out the characters. While I do appreciate the dynamics in Templar Squad, individually the characters are still kind of bland. They're written well enough in cutscenes, but I just don't think we get enough time with them. In other shooters where you're accompanied by a partner squad, like The Last of Us or Spec Ops: The Line, there's a lot of chatter during gameplay to flesh out the characters. They'll comment on the state of the world, their current situation, or otherwise engage in meaningful conversation. These gameplay conversations, I believe, are a crucial part of bonding you with them. If we only had the cutscenes to go off of, there just wouldn't be enough screen time to really make an impact, given that shooters are fairly short games. In Killzone, the in-game conversations between squad mates are exceptionally bland, and I think this can be directly tied to the ability to choose characters. As I mentioned earlier, the player character is always silent. That means if you play as Templar, then Templar will not speak throughout the level. The ramification of this is that in a level, the game cannot count on any one character being available to deliver dialogue. A level can slip in some interesting backstory or reflection for Luger that the story builds upon later because the player might be playing as Luger and therefore she'll be silent. The same logic applies for Rico, Haka, and Templar. Rico and Haka don't bicker much during gameplay because the player could be playing as either of them and thus cut off the ability for two-way communication. So the only meaningful and significant interactions we get of these characters is conversations during cutscenes. This may work fine with one or two characters, but when trying to flesh out 4 characters, there just isn't enough time. In addition, there are some oddities that crop up. For instance, in one level I played as Rico, and Templar orders him to push ahead while the others cover him.
Heavy MG! Rico, we'll lay down suppressive fire while you advance on it!
Really? With Rico's lumbering machine gun? Shouldn't he be the one laying down cover fire while somebody like Luger or Haka pushes on? Despite the cool gameplay differences, the characters still end up feeling fairly interchangeable. Okay, rant over for now. I'll bring this back up though, as I think it's especially relevant to the end of the game. Now back to the main story. The squad takes down another base and determines next steps. They won't reach the uplink in time as is, so they pivot. They intend on seizing a ship from an enemy missile base, which is near, and flying to the uplink. It's dangerous, but they lack other options. Meanwhile, we see that General Lentes is heading to the same missile base. Tension builds as a confrontation is imminent. A soldier delivers the bad news about the rogue squad's latest victory. General Adams snaps and kills this unlucky messenger. This demonstrates just how unhinged Adams is. He has anger issues obviously, but I think a large part of this visceral reaction is driven by anxiety over what Emperor Viscari thinks of him. The squad fights through the missile base, resulting in a confrontation with General Lentes at the top. Once they take the general down, Haka approaches him. The two know each other. Haka, in fact, was the chief of staff for General Lentes.
But he changed, developed a bleeding heart, became a revolutionary.
Yes, it's you who've changed, Lenti. You who sold your soul to Visari for a taste of power.
My family will attend a hero's funeral for me, Hacker. Your mother pretends you're dead already. The rest of your family never even mention your name. Only your brother speaks of your heroism. At least he did, until I had him shot.
This is one of my favorite cutscenes in the game. We learn more about Hakka's past, and we learn about the devastating fate of his brother with him. He shoots the general in his clinical fashion, but there's a pain in his face which creeps through the cold mask he wears. We learn that Hakka could have had it all. He could have been a general himself, but he gave it up to become a revolutionary. General Lente says it's because Hakka changed, but Hakka says it's because the general changed. This cutscene fills in more about Hakka's backstory, but it still doesn't really answer the burning question: why did Hakka turn? From the loyalty he once displayed, there seems to have been some inciting incident for him to make such a drastic pivot in his life. Something happened, but we don't know, and we won't ever know. We don't learn any more about Hakka's past in the game, nor in the series as a whole. While this gives him an air of mystery, I think it's ultimately unsatisfying. His story comes across as incomplete rather than just ambiguous. Hakka is the most complex and intriguing character in the game, and I just wish we'd have gotten more of him. General Adams seems happy when he learns about General Lente's downfall. One less rival for the Emperor, I suppose. He prepares his defenses as he knows the squad is inbound. The squad lands on a snowy mountain, as close as they can get to the uplink. They have to make the rest of the journey on foot. Templar and Luger have another tense moment, leading Rico to ask what's going on between them. Hakka boils down their dynamic.
What's up with them?
Oh, you haven't worked it out?
No. Why don't you tell me?
Right, well, as Special Forces captain falls in love, he promises her the world, but she has other plans. 9 months later, they meet again, except now the brave captain's sweetheart is a cold assassin. Trained to kill. Trained to think. Not feel. Act. Not reflect. Oh, she's almost perfect. Although I suspect Captain Templar feels otherwise.
The way Hakka describes the conflict is very dramatic, and from this conversation you'd expect there to be some sort of resolution to the increasing tension between Templar and Luger. Unfortunately, this is the last we hear about their relationship dynamic. This won't be revisited even in subsequent games. It comes across as incomplete, even more incomplete than Hakka's backstory. It's almost like the game forgets about it from here on out. The squad fights through the snowy mountains to reach their objective. Earlier I spoke about Killzone's combat and enemy design and how there are some drawbacks. Well, this section is where they are the most prominent. The player has built-in inaccuracy, while enemies on the opposite end can be blisteringly accurate. In close quarters, this can actually be immersive, as it puts the Helghast on more even footing with the player and makes them seem competent and dangerous. But this mountain section has a lot of long-range encounters, and this design tilts into the frustrating category. Oftentimes I would be shooting at a target with my crosshair on center, and I'd just have to wait for the bullets to actually hit. Meanwhile, the Helghast could chip away at my health, even if they're far away and only my shoulder was peeking out from behind some rock. I think this damages some of the immersion because the Helghast enemies go from feeling intelligent and skilled to unfair and artificial. Nonetheless, our squad fights its way up the mountain and reaches a rocket ship. They board and use this ship to reach the SD platform. They ready themselves for the intense battle that is to come. They fight through some troops and board a transit, which will take them to the main segment of the platform where General Adams resides. They watch as the Earth fleet arrives. General Adams wastes no time in using the SD platform to destroy them. The squad has a time limit. Either Adams is going to succeed and destroy the entire fleet, or the fleet is going to destroy the SD platform, which unfortunately our squad is still on. The squad makes a plan. They're each to break off and accomplish a different objective. I touched on this a bit earlier, but this final level diverges based on which character you're playing as. I played through this level twice, once as Templar and as Hakka. While playing as Templar, I sabotaged the calling system that the SD platform uses. While playing as Hakka, I took care of the parasite modules which deliver Helghast troops like pathogens into the ship, hence the name. This change in the level is a really cool touch, and it makes this final level one of my favorites. It feels especially personalized to the character you play as. Once this objective is accomplished, the player confronts the general. There are separate cutscenes depending on which character you selected, and I believe this is the only time that the game does this. It's cool, but it isn't a huge deal either. The protagonist doesn't get very much dialogue, as it's primarily General Adams monologuing, and that monologue is pretty much the same each time. Here we finally get General Adams' justification for his betrayal. It's something I at least had been waiting on, and it was one of my big narrative curiosities. Unfortunately, it doesn't really work for me. At first he starts off on a sympathetic bent. The Helghast see themselves as victims of imperialist ISA aggression.
You don't get it, do you? They see us as the aggressor. They are fighting to claim what we once stole from them, fighting to prevent another imperialist ISA attack on their homeland.
This reflects Solar Viscari's speech at the beginning of the game. This reasoning makes enough sense in isolation, except that General Adams' personality throughout the game doesn't really align with this motivation. He never seems to give much care to the Helghans, and is always portrayed as acutely self-interested. He's always wondering what the Emperor thinks of him personally. He also murdered his own man in cold blood just for delivering bad news. Him being a sympathetic freedom fighter for another people's cause, that shoe just doesn't fit. Then the general moves on to talking about visions of power that Solar Viscari has shown him. He speaks about how the Helghast will never be stopped and never be bargained with.
If only you could see the visions Viscari has shown me. The power, the lengths to which they are willing to go. They will never stop. They will never be bargained with.
This motivation seems to undercut the first. The Helghan being portrayed as coveters of power who will stop at nothing to get it doesn't really jive with the victims angle. I guess in summation, it just doesn't feel like Adams has a cohesive vision. It feels like the justification has been backfilled into his character as a justification for his betrayal, rather than being an organic part of him. The confrontation between him and the player also feels a bit underwhelming, and I think this is due to the generic nature of any of the 4 characters possibly being in it. Because this cutscene is dynamic, it doesn't feel like a moment the game was building towards. The game couldn't really build towards a Templar and Adams confrontation, for instance, because Templar might not be here at this moment. Helghast reinforcements arrive. Our character reunites with his squad and fights off the enemies before taking down General Adams. With the mission accomplished, the squad has to exfil. Colonel Haka attempts to remove a fuel line from the escape ship, and he ends up getting stuck underneath it. Rico of all people comes to the rescue. He grabs Haka and drags him out of the fray, taking a bullet himself for the effort. This is a great moment. It's a moment you could see coming as soon as Rico and Haka's rivalry was introduced, but it's great nonetheless. As I've always held to in writing, execution is everything. The build-up of Rico and Haka's trust has felt very natural, and as such this moment also feels organic and true to them. It also feels like a proper conclusion to their character dynamics, which we didn't get with Templar or Luger's relationship. The squad flies past the ISA fleet and takes solace in the fact that they've succeeded. Most of the fleet remains intact. However, they also know that this conflict is far from over. As General Adams himself said, the Helghast will send more men. This was only one small conflict in the war. Templar resolves that whatever conflict comes their way, they'll be ready to meet it. With that, the story of Killzone ends. I know I got a bit negative towards the end of the game. I just think that the game starts to buckle a bit under its own weight. The game is trying to juggle a lot. There are 4 primary characters with multiple subplots between them. There is Luger and Templar's relationship, Haka's past, and Rico and Haka's relationship. That's not even to mention the main plot, or General Adams fleshing out as a villain. With the game's dynamic structure, there just isn't enough bandwidth to build up and resolve all these different plots in a robust way. So at the end of the game, you can see these seams start to fray. With that negativity in mind, I want to bring this back to what Killzone does well. The game sets up a very intriguing and complicated war between the ISA and the Helghast. The Helghast in particular are standouts, being one of the most iconic and fascinating factions in sci-fi shooters. On top of that, the cohesive world building and design make the world feel believable as well as immersive. Ultimately, I look upon Killzone very fondly. It's a wonderful game to replay, and to pick up on new details and nuances each playthrough. While the character drama may have stumbled, the world and overarching conflict are top-notch. You're pulled into the fray, and you're left wanting to see more of this world and story. That's the most important thing to nail for the first entry of a series. You want the player to want more. Killzone's greatest gift to gaming is that it sets up its sequel, Killzone 2, so well. Killzone 2 is one of the greatest shooters of all time, at least in my opinion, and it gets off the ground running from everything Killzone has built. But that will have to wait for another day. Thanks for watching. If you liked the video, please consider liking and subscribing. If you want to support me further, please consider reading and reviewing Apocalypse Bounty so I can hit my goal. I appreciate each and every one of you. Until next time.